In the spring of 1933, a tiny nation in Central Europe came dangerously close to changing history forever. This is the forgotten story of an utterly ordinary man who became a most extraordinary threat. Tonight, on the History of Moderatism, Episode 1, History Dodged a Bullet, the story of Miroslav Kuritski. In the spring of 1933, the tiny republic of Pilovia found itself trapped between the boiling ideological extremes of Europe. To the west, Polish nationalists marched. To the east, Soviet agents whispered of revolution. Street fights between red shirts and brown shirts had become nightly entertainment in the capital. Most citizens simply wanted the shouting to stop. They had no idea that the man who would finally bring peace would be the most average man alive. His name was Miroslav Kuritski. A mid-level clerk at the Pilovian Ministry of Weights and Measures, he measured grain sacks for a living and had never once raised his voice above a polite murmur. He had an average wife named Obychna and two unremarkable children, a son named Sin and a daughter named Chera. One rainy Tuesday, to escape the cold, Kuritski ducked into a half-empty lecture hall, where the chapter of the Moderate Party offered free coffee. Founded in 1927 by the thoroughly ordinary accountant Emil Obycheny, the Moderates began as a small discussion group that simply wanted everyone to calm down. They opposed the chaotic revolutionaries on the left and the militaristic nationalists on the right. For years they struggled in obscurity, ignored by the major parties, dismissed as naive dreamers, and occasionally roughed up by extremists from both sides who saw their calls for restraint as a threat. Yet they persisted, printing modest pamphlets and holding quiet meetings in half-empty halls, always insisting that balance and reason could prevail. The speaker that day, an equally forgettable professor named Helmut Boring, uttered a single sentence that would change Pilovian history. Friends, everything is acceptable, in moderation. Kuritski felt something stir inside his beige little soul. For the first time, something felt correct. Within weeks, he had joined the party. Within months, he had become its quiet face. The moderates did not win with fiery speeches or marching songs. They won because Kuritski never went overboard. While communists promised utopia and fascists promised glory, Kuritski stood at the podium in his same grey suit and calmly suggested, "Perhaps we could have slightly less shouting." Exhausted voters handed the moderates seat after seat in Parliament. Their symbol was simple, a single M inside a circle. It appeared spray-painted overnight on buildings in both communist and nationalist districts. The paint was deliberately cheap. Every rainstorm washed it away. Party spokesmen proudly declared that our symbols yield to nature. Even their graffiti practiced moderation. By 1936, the moderates were the largest single party in Pelovia. And yet, Kuritski never raised his voice. He simply pointed out that both sides were being unreasonable. The public, desperate for calm, rewarded him with more power. Then something shifted. Moderation stopped being a suggestion and became the only acceptable position. Any strong opinion was now labeled radicalism. Passionate priests, fiery artists, even people who admitted to an enthusiastic taste for pickles, all were warned. The Moderate Youth League began reporting their own parents for excessive enthusiasm. When the party gained a parliamentary majority, they passed the Reasonable Speech Act, whereby the expression of anything too strongly became a misdemeanor. Repeat offenses earned a stay in a de-radicalization center, where inmates learned to say, "on the other hand," and "it's complicated," in their sleep. Kuritski never changed his tone. He still spoke like a man reading the weather report. Yet under his leadership, Pelovia achieved total moderation. Newspapers ran headlines like, "Government announces mildly satisfactory economic results." Soccer matches ended in polite 0-0 draws by mutual agreement. Even the weather, some joked, became more temperate. On the eve of his installation as supreme moderator with emergency powers, Miroslav Kuritski stepped out onto the balcony of the National Assembly. 2 shots rang out at the exact same instant. One came from the eastern side of the square, a radical leftist assassin. The other from the western side, a radical right-wing gunman. Medical examiners later confirmed that either wound would have been fatal on its own. To this day, Pilovian historians cannot agree which bullet was the fatal one. A smaller but growing school of thought quietly suggests that, in the end, moderation simply died of natural causes. And so ended the brief but remarkably reasonable reign of Miroslav Kuritski, the man who proved that too much of anything, even moderation, can be dangerous. And so the moderate dream in Pelovia came to a quiet and reasonable end. But the story of moderatism was far from over. Next time on the History of Moderatism, we travel to the 1950s and 60s and meet the reasonable generation, the C averages, who refused to join either side of the cultural war. Be sure to join us for episode 2, The Straight Mouth Smile.